I'm Nick Jiménez, and this is the Cigar Snob podcast. If you are an active cigar smoker on social media, then there's a good chance that you've been seeing references to or trailers for a documentary called Hand Rolled. The film is still in production, but so far we know that the people behind the movie have done interviews with some of the cigar world's heavy hitters. I recently had a chance to talk to one of the film's producers, Steve Gherebean, about how the project was born, who was behind it, and how they're going about telling the story of premium cigars. Before we get into the interview, though, we've got to pay the bills, so here's a word from this episode's sponsor, Safra Rum. At Cigar Snob magazine, we know that man cannot live on water alone, which is why we keep a healthy stockpile of Safra Rum at the office. I'm Nick Jiménez, senior editor of Cigar Snob magazine, and I'm here to tell you that every time we crack open a bottle of Safra Rum, we are impressed. In fact, I'm kind of hydrating with Safra Rum right now. It's unlike anything else, in part because of Safra's small batch approach. They use only hand-cut sugarcane and process it into top-grade molasses, distill in column stills, and ferment in a proprietary, locally grown yeast. The rum master then ages the virgin rum in carefully selected bourbon oak casks. The end result is a rum masterpiece that's great for top-shelf cocktails, drinking it on the rocks, or even just drinking it neat, which, by the way, is what we did when we paired this in the pages of Cigar Snob magazine with the Oliva Serie B Melanio, but it goes great with just about any cigar. Here's what we had to say about Safra Rum. Quote, the rum introduces smooth, honey, caramel, and molasses flavors that start to complement the coffee, chocolate, and spice from the cigar. Safra also received an exceptional 95-point rating from the Beverage Tasting Institute, so we are not the only ones who are crazy about this stuff. It's just another one of their prestigious awards. Ask for Safra Rum at your favorite retailer, restaurant, or bar. Make sure you follow them on Facebook and Instagram at Safra Rum. That's Z-A-F-R-A Rum. Safra Rum. Always drink responsibly, and remember that there is no rum without Safra. All right, now on to the interview with Steve Gherebean about the forthcoming film, Hand Rolled. So, thank you for this call, man. I appreciate it. Let's start with a bit about you and the other people who are behind the project. What can you tell me about the people who are producing this film and your background as it relates to cigars? Have you guys been? Is this a group of smokers? Is it a group that was sort of introduced to a lot of this world through this process? How did you all get into this?
Yeah, so primarily it's me and my partner Jesse Marriott, who we're co-directors, and we've been commercial filmmakers for a while, and we just had this thought one day that let's do something interesting, let's shake things up a little bit, and we wanted to do a documentary, and we went through a whole litany of items that we would potentially want to do a documentary on, and we thought, well, what's something that we're really passionate about and we really enjoy, and let's see if there's anything out on that. And so we racked our brains and, thought about a few things. He and I both have a few passions in common, like coffee and bourbon and cigars. And when we thought, dude, there's literally nothing on the cigar world, nothing that's well produced, nothing that's of high quality. You can jump on Netflix, you can jump on Hulu, and there's so much out there on spirits and coffee and all this stuff, but there's just nothing out there on the cigar industry, at least nothing current and relevant. And so we thought, we've been smoking for about 10 years at that point, and we thought, dude, we love this industry. Let's explore it, and let's see if we could do a documentary on it. So we just started putting out a few feelers here and there. We went to the IBCPR in 2016 and met a few people, shook a few hands, and just got a feel of whether this would be well received, and it certainly seemed that it would be, and so that's just where it took off from there. So we're not technically in the industry at all whatsoever. We're completely coming from outside. We're just, we were just casual smokers, and we had a few little collectible items that we smoked on special occasions, but nothing I would say that was terribly serious back then.
Yeah. So when you first started to bounce this idea off of people in the industry, whether at IPCPR or any other settings, what was some of the initial reaction that you got, and who were some of the people who were most receptive to the idea and to the idea of involving themselves and supporting the project?
Initially, the IPCPR themselves sort of got on board. They let us come in with press passes, and they even some of the folks like Matt DeGauli and Rachel, they took us around the showroom floor, and they even introduced us to some of the manufacturers. So I would say initially their support was paramount to us even starting this, because it gave us a leg to stand on. When you're brand new, when nobody knows who you are, and you just show up to a convention, people thought we were, people just thought we were one of the small little startup bloggers that are just trying to, get free stuff. And we were like, we're not looking for any handouts. We don't want any free cigars. We don't want anything like that. And so,
which you can't blame them for. I mean, if you went to the trade show, just how much of that there is there. Which there's nothing wrong with that, But it's a very, especially considering the size, how small the industry really is. It's incredible how much of that blogger community there is. So.
Exactly. And so we didn't even take a camera with us on the showroom floor. We literally just walked around and met people and talked to them and try to get a sense of how well received something like this would be. And so I would say every single manufacturer that we talked to thought it would be a good idea, and was receptive to the idea and gave us a little bit of their time, which was surprising to us, because they're really busy those days, while they're at the IPCPR. They don't take a lot of time to chat outside of doing business and talking. The fact that they gave us, most of them gave us at least 5 to 10 minutes to just sit and chat, and so that was a huge win, we felt. And so and even especially Pete Johnson, we almost didn't even. He was so busy during the whole convention, we almost didn't even stop in to chat with him, because that was one of our things. We didn't want to interrupt anybody, and we just went to manufacturers as we saw they weren't, inundated with people. And so right after we were leaving the showroom on the last day, he was basically by himself in a corner and walked up and said, hey, and introduced ourselves and told him about what we were doing, and he was ecstatic. And so that's sort of where he met Jesse and me, and sort of got on board with the project initially. Now a few other manufacturers have got on board as well, which is awesome, but he was certainly the first.
Sure. So over the course of, that was about when? Sorry if you already mentioned this, but that was which IPCPR that you met at?
16.
Okay, so over the course of the roughly year and a half or so since then, what has the concept of the documentary changed very much? Well, how did you start in your heads, and where have you ended up now?
Yeah, so back if you recall back to 2016, we made sort of a mock trailer that we had put up just to show people, just to get them an idea of what we were looking to do, quality wise and narrative wise, and so back then we were heavily focused on all of the FDA stuff, because it was it's what everybody was talking about, and so we sort of jumped in right when that was the heavy topic of conversation. And even the retailers that we reached out to initially, they were all talking about the FDA stuff. And so our initial sense was that, we need to try to tell people about what's going on with the FDA. And then as things sort of mellowed from there over the last year and a half, and we actually started production, we, talking to a few people, we were like, let's do something that's actually going to be interesting after 2016, after 2017, after this whole FDA hype is resolved and settled. We don't want to make something dated, so we really kind of backed off of that. And we figured, if we can, if somebody that watches this, let's say they just, throw it up on Netflix when they're bored one evening, and they watch this, and all they get out of it is that a cigar is a completely different thing than a cigarette, then we've done our job, and we've won it. So that's sort of the feeling that we want to leave people with. We've even titled the movie Hand Rolled, because we want to really put an emphasis on the human element, how many people are involved in the process, and just really show that it's a beautiful handcrafted industry, and it's nothing like cigarettes, and it's nothing like other tobacco products that are, chemically made or machine made or what have you.
Yeah. So you guys are in LA, and originally, at least, the you kind of started open to other ideas. So I imagine that over the course of this whole process, whether it's other people in the film industry or other people in LA have sort of, you've bounced this idea off of them, or they've gotten wind of it. What's the reaction been from people outside of the cigar community? Because I have to imagine that, the FDA thing has at its root what is, at least in some places, kind of a popular sentiment of just like, let's keep, sort of forcibly pushing cigars out. Have you sort of come across detractors or people who are not crazy about the idea of sort of putting the focus on the romantic and the craftsmanship aspects of cigar making?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the reason that we find people like that is because they don't know about that aspect of it. I haven't encountered anybody, after having watched even just our short trailer or having had, a 30-second to a minute long conversation that has been as opposed to it as before watching or having that conversation. And the reason is because, when we meet people and they're like, oh my God, why would you do a documentary on cigars, and especially a positive one? And then you start telling them, how many people are involved in the process and what the process takes. And, you show them a little bit of footage of having been out on the farms and talking to people and rollers and everything. That their whole mood and idea sort of changes after that point, because it's really just a matter of ignorance. And I don't think it's necessarily willful ignorance. I think it's just a result of sort of growing up in a culture where you're taught, tobacco's terrible and we want to eradicate it from the planet, and all the products are the same, whether it's cigarettes or cigars or vape or hookah or whatever it is. They're all terrible for you, and so once we get a glimpse that it's not everything it's always been made out to be, people are a lot more receptive to the idea. And again, especially adding the human element, like for us, we found that was so paramount to people just being accepting of the content of the film. People are always receptive to a human story, to a humanized story. And for us, that's what we want to bring to the fold, is humanizing the industry, putting a face to the industry. It's easy to hate big tobacco. It's easy to hate corporate, lobbyists and the big tobacco folks, but it's really hard to hate the face of a person that's working and has put their life in this craft, in this thing that they've spent their whole life perfecting it. So that's what we're trying to bring to the fold here.
Sure. So, I imagine, based on the on the trailers and some of the content that I've seen online, that this is very sort of an interview-based thing. Like you said, you're sort of humanizing cigars, and I know that you've spoken to a whole bunch of cigar makers and also people who are sort of on the in the satellite or cottage industries that surround cigars. What have, for you all, or maybe for you personally, what have been some of the more surprising experiences that you've had? Because you sort of go into it having some sense of what you're going to get, of what the story is going to be. But I wonder whether, you've been maybe in the middle of shooting an interview or something like that and been caught off guard by, whether it was something somebody said or maybe, how interesting a particular person was, or what somebody brought to the story that you didn't see coming. What were some of the surprises throughout the process so far?
Man, there have been so many. I will say, just to touch on your earlier point, we have interviewed a lot of the greats of the industry so far, but we've also, you don't necessarily see it through our trailer yet because we don't have everything translated, but we've also interviewed, down to just farm workers. We literally, we were in Nicaragua last January around this time, actually, and we're actually flying back out there on Sunday. We were in Nicaragua, and it was a Saturday when a lot of people didn't work on the farms, and we just decided to go out and see if we can find any farmers. And we pulled up to a random farm, and I honestly to this day don't know which manufacturer it's from or who it is. We kind of purposely didn't check because we didn't want to be biased. We didn't want, we didn't want to ask those type of questions, and we certainly didn't want to, we wanted to be able to speak candidly with farmers without them feeling like they had, somebody looking over their shoulder or something, And so we offered them a ride home and some lunch, and we just did a little, asked them if we could do just a short interview and see where they lived and see, the houses. And to me, I didn't know exactly what to expect going in, but I just knew that I wanted to get truthful statements, and I didn't want them to feel like they had to say really good things about the industry. So we went down, we went to their houses, and we sort of interviewed 5 ladies just sitting in the courtyard of their houses, and just asking them, how they felt about their work, and obviously, I mean, to no surprise, it's laborious work. It's farming, it's tough, but each and every one of them told us that if it wasn't for the tobacco industry that was there, for the folks that treated them well, they had clinics to go to when they were sick, they would have nothing. I asked them, what would you have to do if the tobacco industry wasn't here? And one of the ladies said, I'd probably have to go back to farming tomatoes, which was way more backbreaking and paid a lot less. And I couldn't live off of it, but it'd probably be what I had to do. And so, for us, that was really surprising, because I expect them to, to sort of, to open up a little bit more and be critical, but none of them were really critical about it. They all said, this is something that we need in our town, and we need this to survive, and we're talking about the bottom of the food chain, as it were, over there in the industry, the lowliest, least skilled positions that the industry has to offer.
Sure.
And they're talking about how they absolutely need these jobs and how devastated they would be without them. And so for us, that was a huge eye-opening thing. And it's kind of the point where we realized, like, this industry is actually doing a net good in the lives of the people that are involved in creating it. And so that was a huge thing for us. Obviously, there's been numerous times throughout interviews where I've been surprised, but I would say that was the one that stuck out the most to me, personally.
So, aside from all of the interviews with people who are involved in actually making and maybe even selling and distributing cigars, I know that the documentary gets into a bit of, for lack of a better term, the smoker side or the consumer side. And so that's not something that I think, you get a sense in the trailers yet for how it figures into the way you guys tell this story. What would you say? And again, I'm especially interested in how you think non-smokers have perceived it, if they've seen some of the footage so far. What are some of the takeaways that a non-smoker might have from the way that American or other smokers figure into the story? I know you've spoken to Delicia, the cigar vixen, Berta Bravo, both of whom are sort of, on the fringes of the industry itself, but not actually making or selling cigars. Jim Jackson. Yeah. So what does a non-smoker take from the movie about what it's like to be a smoker, or how that, how that world sort of functions?
One of the reoccurring themes that we hear from the smoker side, from the consumer side, has been just that, and I can't remember exactly who said this, but something along the lines of, whether it was Jim or somebody else that said that cigars are like the great equalizer, and that, you get in a room with a bunch of people, it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, you can sit down around a cigar and just, enjoy it for that time, and, have great conversation. And it sort of forces you, it forces you in a sense to sit back and relax and spend the next hour, decompressing, and getting your mind off the day or the week or whatever it might be. And so for us, with the consumer side, what we're trying to show is that, people that are smoking are not, we're trying to dispel some of the myths that maybe that have been shown in TV over the course of the years, where it's always like the bad guy smoking a cigar or something like that, and just show, like, you've got everywhere from the highest rungs of society to just normal everyday people enjoying the cigar, and oftentimes together. And it's something that brings people together, and it relaxes people. And it's not this, it's not this crazy vice that, you know, you get addicted to and you can't stop doing. It's something that people enjoy almost in the way, in much the same way that they enjoy wine or, you know, other meticulous crafted, goods. So that's what we're trying to show from the consumer side. You know, again, in this attempt to humanize the industry, we're trying to show it from all angles, from the producer side, to the worker side, to the consumer side, retail side, every aspect that we can kind of show. And this is it's been crazy, and it's going to be interesting to see how this whole story comes together. There are some unknowns for us. We have about 30% of production remaining. We're like I said, we're going to Nicaragua in a couple of days here, and we'll be going to the DR and probably Cuba as well in the next month or so. Still ironing out all those details. And so, the story still has a little bit left to unfold, but, it has been very eye-opening from all sides.
All right. So before we get into some of the more pluggy type stuff, over the course of this process, I have to imagine, considering all the people that you've talked to for the movie, you've smoked some things that you hadn't smoked before. I figure you're going to have a little bit of bias here, but I'll ask anyway. What are some of the, excluding things that you had smoked before all this production process, what are some of the standout cigars for you?
Man, that's a tough one. I try not to answer that question very much. No, because there's just so much, there's so much awesome stuff out there. I would say some, we randomly, when we were in Nicaragua last year, we randomly met like Nick Molillo of Foundation Cigars, and I hadn't even heard of him till that point. And then we come to find out his story, and I say randomly, like we literally met him in a coffee shop in Esteli, and he just overheard us talking about cigars, and I saw that he was editing something for a cigar on his computer, and we just struck up a conversation. Since then we've gone out to visit him out in Connecticut, and film with him for a while, and his tabernacle is one of my favorites. As like a daily smoke, and that one I would say, to your question of something that you've never tried or heard of before, that was pretty awesome. Also in the course of just randomly meeting people and hanging out, I would say I've had a couple of KSAs in the last year, which I never thought I'd get my hands on. Those were pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we've had some pretty awesome rare tatuajes that we've gotten to smoke with Pete. Some of the stuff that he hasn't released that's been aging, and that was also pretty awesome. But that said, there's just been so much good stuff that we've tried in the last year that it's hard to just. I guess those are some of the rarer or more random sort of ones that stick out.
Yeah,
at the moment.
I know I said that would be the last question before the pluggy stuff, but I do want to get one other thing in because it just occurred to me. Over the course of this process, and I don't really have a sense of who in the cigar industry you had, spoken to before this idea ever came up in your heads, but it sounds like you sort of began to meet some of these characters after this, right? It wasn't like you sort of were socially intertwined.
We literally knew nobody. We knew our local tobacconist. We had met him, I think, once prior to this.
So I'm looking at some of the people you spoke with, and I'm noticing that you spoke with the Padrones. You spoke with obviously with Pete, and I imagine that brought you in touch with the Garcias.
Mm-hmm.
How, if at all, maybe this is sort of maybe there's really not much of an answer here. I know with Beta, how, if at all, did this whole process change your perspective, or did you hear things that you hadn't heard before, or whatever about Cuba? Because it's, even if you're not talking about Cuban cigars, it's difficult to have this conversation without talking Cuba. What was that aspect of it like?
That's a very interesting question. We've been really going back and forth, sort of in our meetings and talk and how we would present Cuba, because we interviewed a guy named Joel and on the lifestyle, and I think he said something that sort of resonated and almost
in very few words encapsulate.
Is this how Joel Wilbur?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a short phrase, he encapsulated almost exactly how I feel about this, and he said, the best and worst cigars I've ever smoked are Cubans, and the way we sort of want to show Cuba in light of this film is that definitely from the historical side, they're a giant, right? And from the product side, they have some of the best stuff in the world. But on lots of the production side, it seems like their quality has decreased over the years. And so what we basically, the commentary that I think we're going to go with Cuba is going to be something along the lines of that we want them to come back to their roots. We want them to come back to the high quality stuff because we know that it's out there. We know that they can produce it, and they're producing some of it. But it seems like, they're really kind of being left behind on some of their more production, the higher production stuff. We've been hearing a lot of reports from just a lot of consumers talking about how, a good portion of their boxes every time they get Cubans are just unsmokable. They don't draw. We've heard numerous people tell us that the tobacco seems like it's still green in the boxes once they get them. And so, for us, it's like, coming from outside the industry, we initially had, really high regard for Cuban cigars. And, before we started the film, I'd only smoked a couple myself, but I just remember, I don't know if it was whether I was enamored with the idea that I was smoking something that I wasn't supposed to or whatnot, but I remember really enjoying the process, and it was like a special occasion for us. And so, coming to find out that, people are having all these issues smoking Cubans, and then in the process, having smoked more and more since then, seeing it myself, having, Cubans that don't draw, I've had several of them in the past year that just, I stopped smoking a third of the way through because it was just, it was a hassle more than anything. And so, it's really going to depend a lot on whether we're able to get out there and film with people, because there is this side of the Cuban story that we just want to show, and we would love to present it in an extremely positive light, and almost a redemptive way, like almost encouraging them to get back to their roots, is the way we'd like to portray them, because we're not trying to poo-poo them or badmouth the Cuban industry, but at the same time, it's like when you hear story after story after story of quality control issues and whatnot, it's really kind of a bummer.
Sure. Yeah. And like you said, I think that's a great way to put it, is that whole, the best and the worst are Cuban. I hesitate to say best because there are a lot of non-Cubans that are right up there, but certainly it's tough to beat a Cuban when all the conditions are right.
Exactly.
I'm going to take a wild guess. I wonder whether you got your KSA from Joel.
A couple of them. Yeah.
Yeah. I when I met him, it must have been maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. He had one left, and I was with Eric, our publisher, and he pulled rank. So I still haven't gotten into a KSA, but soon enough. Anyway, so tell us roughly what the timeline looks like on production. Where can people get more information, and how can they help you guys close the loop here?
Yeah. So production-wise, like I said, we're in Nicaragua in a couple of days here. We're going to be hitting the DR and Cuba hopefully in February. End of February, I think, is the goal here. And we hope to be finished with post-production, by July. We'd like to, we're still sort of chatting with people at IPCPR, so this isn't a for sure thing, but we'd like to screen the film first for some of the manufacturers and some people at IPCPR, just as like a thank you for everybody that's just been involved with the process. It's been a crazy ride, and so many awesome people have come together to just help us out. So, like I said, we're finishing production by beginning of March, end of February, and post-production, we hope to be done fully with the film by July and have it out in July for people to watch.
Excellent, man. All right, well, thank you very much. Thanks for the time. We're really looking forward to watching this thing when it's ready.
Awesome, yeah.
Thanks to Steve for the time. If you have any questions, comments, or other feedback, feel free to write us at feedback@cigarsnobmag.com. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Google+. Make sure you also follow us on YouTube. You can find all of those links at cigarsnobmag.com. In case you missed it, episode 14 of the Cigar Snob podcast featured an interview with Klaus-Peter Kellner, a Davidoff brand ambassador and son of Henke Kellner, from whom he has inherited the task of leading a lot of the tours on the Davidoff factory floor and farming operations. So make sure you go back and check that out. As always, thanks for listening to the Cigar Snob podcast. Catch you next time.